Okay, I wanted to respond to an interesting comment that was brought up. I think it was in the Chris Kresser, Joel Kahn debate on Joe Rogan's show, where they talked about, is a carnivore diet a fasting mimetic? That is to say, does it imitate what you see in fasting? And I think that was a fairly insightful comment. And, one of the things they notice is that many people will improve a number of chronic conditions by fasting, and that Chris Kresser proposed that the gut is given a rest because of the fact that meat is absorbed, basically in the small intestine. That's what actually happens. We've got pretty good studies on that in ileostomy patients, which kind of confirm that. If we look at, what do we have in common with fasting and an all-meat diet? Well, it's basically pretty simple. It's the absence of plant material, right? When you're fasting, you're not eating anything, so you're excluding fat, you're excluding plants. When you're on an all-meat diet, the same thing's occurring. You're excluding plants. The results are fairly similar. It makes one wonder. Well, maybe excluding the plants is helpful. Giving yourself a break from compounds that are found in plants, oxalates, salicylates, phytates, glycoalkaloids, cyanides. The list goes on and on. Perhaps giving ourselves a break from those things, or not including those things in our diet, is actually a good strategy. And I think that's why we're seeing such good results from a carnivorous diet. And again, he points out that you can't fast forever, but you got to eat something. And again, meat being a very well-tolerated food for the vast majority of people. And you think about historically, evolutionarily wise, what humans would have done. Now, certainly people make the arguments that no one was always 100% successful when they hunt. A lot of animals, miss. We have to remember the environment that humans lived in, 25,000, 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 years ago while we were evolving. Much of the world, it was an ice age during most of those times, and so much of humanity lived among the grasslands where megafaunal animals were heavily populated. We know that we had vast herds of, very large megafauna, mammoths, elephants, other, again, very large, very fatty animals, and humans were very adept at killing those and tracking them and butchering them and actually storing that meat. And so it's probably very plausible that while the human populations were relatively small, we had vast access to large quantities of megafaunal animals, that we clearly use those as a food source. And you think about it, if you take down an elephant, most humans clustered in groups of a dozen to maybe 20 people. So if you take down an elephant, you've got several months worth of meat. And they're not that hard to track. They're actually surprisingly not that hard to kill. We've seen that from a number of anthropologists. If you listen to our HPO, Human Performance Outlier podcast with Mickey Van Dor, he goes into great length on how humans with very low technology, just a spear, are very easily able to kill animals like elephants and presumably mammoths. And so having easy access to food, which was very nutritious, fairly, again, easy to acquire, meant that humans probably didn't do a lot of intentional fasting. I don't think that was part of the human strategy. I don't think any animal would do that. They would eat until they got their fill, and then they would, not eat again until they were hungry again. And if you had a nice storage area of mammoth meat, stuck in the snow or dried or underwater, however the preservation techniques that they use, and that's clearly what they did, then you would do so. Humans were just as intelligent as we were, today as they were back then, and perhaps arguably so. They were even more intelligent. They certainly had larger brains than we do now. We know after the advent of agriculture, our brain size shrunk by about 200 cc. So we had relatively smart people. They would have had the foresight to plan these things out. They could have seen when their meat supply was getting low. They could have easily just staged another hunt, and I don't think that was very difficult to imagine that scenario. Imagine if you and I were transported to a place 50,000 years ago, and there's big animals running around, and you're hungry, and you've got a pretty good method to kill them. That's probably what you would have done. And then, so interestingly, when humans, and this is another great point that we talked about with Mickey Van Dor, as those megafaunal animals died off, and it's debatable if it was climate change versus human overhunting. I think there's a pretty significant percentage of paleoanthropologists and paleozoologists that think that overhunting did cause that. There's pretty good evidence to show that wherever man traveled, particularly in the southern hemisphere, Australia, New Zealand, the Pacific Islands, that all those megafaunal animals died at some time after humans reached a critical mass on that continent. And so it was interesting that in Australia they discovered that they had thought man got there about 50,000 years ago, which coincided with the die-off of the megafaunal animals. And their initial argument was, well, man got there and just immediately killed them all. What probably happened is we saw that man got there about maybe 15,000 years prior to that. So probably what happens is they get there in small groups, and it's not until they reach a critical size, mass-wise, that then are able to impact, you know, the population of these megafaunal animals. So again, it's probably you know, likely that man killed off a lot of these animals, hunted these animals. Either way, once they went extinct, then we were in a situation where we had to rely on smaller animals, and smaller animals are harder to trap, they're harder to kill, they're harder to catch. You know, it's harder to chase down an antelope with a spear than it is, you know, an elephant which doesn't run away. I mean, their defense strategy is to turn and fight. They don't you know, flee. And humans, you know, were able to kill those with persistent huntings. They were all to inflict a little bit of damage and then wait for it to bleed out, basically. You know, they might follow it for a few hours, you know, hitting it with a spear every now and again until the animal finally succumbs, collapses, and they just go in for the final kill and then butcher it. You've got meat for, you know, arguably for many months. And so after, you know, those animals died off, then we had to develop new technologies, bow and arrow. Those things came in later when we were hunting the smaller animals, you know, killing birds. You know, we probably didn't eat a lot of chicken back then, or whatever the chicken equivalent was 50,000 years ago. We ate the big megafaunal animals, and I think that is why so many people find that the fat, you know, relatively fatty meat tends to do them well. Another thing about fasting is, you know, with a carnivorous diet, most people will fall into a pattern of infrequent meals, time-restricted feeding, intermittent fasting, whatever you want to call that. You know, most people will find that their capacity to go longer without eating, to, you know, be full with, you know, a big steak, you know, a pound of meat. Many people are satisfied for 10, 12, 14, 16 hours. And that probably, again, the benefits of fasting, intermittent fasting, which, again, most people seem to think it is a benefit. There's some people that will argue that, you know, particularly when it comes to weight loss, but certainly health benefits seem to appear. So anyway, does fasting, does a carnivore diet imitate fasting, or does fasting imitate a carnivore diet? I think that's a more appropriate question, because I think that we are clearly seeing similar benefits for both strategies. And, you know, if we want to take health as our goal, you know, not just talking about strict weight loss, but overall health, absence of disease, then either fasting, or probably more evolutionarily appropriate, a heavily carnivorous diet seems to fit the bill. All right, guys, thoughts on fasting? I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know what you think. I'll put some more stuff up on here. I may go into that debate on, well, I'll do the air fryer review probably in a couple days, and some other stuff. So keep paying attention. I appreciate you guys subscribing, and I'll keep getting the information out there. Take care.